Welcome. The topic of the continuation of my personal common science research, common science research. So this should not be used for any reference. The articles are found here. Whatever I've done, you would find the link here. This is not about you. This is only about me. So when I speak here, this all this information is just about my observation on what I would have created as my version of my reality, which is nothing to do with your reality. So let's get into it. The title today is how the different foods, maybe I should put the word different here, how the different, what we call different foods affect stomach acidity. Again, playing back, I should put up my slide here to show you. Yes, so here it is. My trio transformational concept is simple. There are always three things: the physical body, nutrition, and that part that we call spiritual guidance. I call it magic, I call it electricity. Basically, stimulation, the things that are stimulating the body's organ or the body's cells or the body's processes on a whole body level or at an individual level. Spiritual guidance, the way we think, the belief system, the meditations, the visions, the dreams, the electromagnetic, and the different things like grounding, sunlight, they are all in the category of what I call the spiritual guidance mechanisms or the spiritual guidance technologies that stimulate. So it basically, the word stimulate is what I am playing around with here as the critical component that has to be, that gives the body the ability to demand now nutrition. And the nutrition, I always go ahead with my definition that says my common science definition after 45 years of my life has become very clear that what we need is sources of amino acids, sources of fatty acids, sources of minerals, vital elemental minerals, trace minerals, whatever you want to call them, and the specific type of minerals that we call electrolytes or hydration. Therefore, when I look at this in context to our slide, I'm going in directly into the question of asking how the different sources, which is called food, the different sources of whether it's amino acids or fatty acids or minerals, how they affect stomach acidity, and why this ebb and flow intricate balance for me is critical so that I could bring myself to the state of perfection, the state of that which the genetic encoding can be changed to the state that it wants to change at, because there is no limitation on genetic expression. The limitation is based upon your environment or the factors that you put for the expression of the genes. So the genes knows everything, they could do anything unlimited. That's why I call it the magic. But it is you to reach to a certain state where you say, well, I prefer to stick at that state because of my belief system or my stimulation methods and my lack of stimulation methods. Therefore, how does our stomach acidity affect us? Basically, how does our stomach acidity helps us in this walk on journey of building that temple, which is the physical body, in a better way? This is just again for me, AI Health Insight. I am not doing this for you. If you are viewing it, you might get something out of it. So please, thank you for viewing today. Why the acidity in the stomach matters. Any errors you see in the spelling and those things is personal. I spell everything incorrectly. That's my choice. So if you see anything that is not spelled your way, that's your choice, and my way is to spell things incorrectly. I've accepted that about myself, and that's my best way of expressing me to me. So stomach acidity is essential for digestion is a very conceptual broad statement. I don't know what is digestion, so let's break it down. In fact, these should be all under the next bullet point here. So it helps breaks down food, especially proteins and fats. Now that is of course controversial because we know, as we would see later, that it is the stomach acidity that really opens up the protein from a coiled serpent into a long stretched out serpent. That is Moses putting down the stick and getting it turned into a serpent, so that now it is softened because of the stomach acidity, and then the stomach acidity brings about or activates this thing called pepsin, converting pepsinogen to pepsin to start cutting up the long, nice, soft piece of uncoiled protein or polypeptides, if that is what the word you want to use. I understand this, I accept this as a critical factor for the digestion of our protein, dietary meats. I wouldn't use the word protein, dietary meats to create polypeptides, which is because of it's getting caught up by that scissor, that instrument called pepsin, and then sooner or later down the road it will become individual links, which we call amino acids. So it is critical for me to have a acidic stomach as based upon the designer's design, so that I would be able to have my meat converted into that which could go into the small intestine called dipeptides, tripeptides, and amino acids. Basically it should be amino acid, but I have read in some papers for collagen hydrolyzed collagen could go in as tri and dipeptides. So I don't know if that's a good thing or if that's a normal thing, but I am seeking to get all the amino acids exposed from the meat, and to get that done I need an acidic stomach. Now the point about fat here, I am not clear. Fats would also have to be broken down, just as you think about piece of protein being a coiled up piece of meat that is going to uncoil. Very microscopic things we're speaking about here. I don't know if it's the same thing for the FATs, if they are in this long chain of well, I don't know if you call it triglycerides or whatever, and if those triglycerides are also cut into smaller parts later on when you have the protein enzymes down into the small intestine after the pancreas. I don't know if that is what's happening, but what I know is that the presence, and which we will discuss in more details, the presence of the fat helps in the long flow or the long duration and increased flow of our acidic stomach, which is very important because when you eat a good meal of meat, and meat should have fat in it, so let's say you eat some lean protein and you have included some good fats, what you are doing, the lean protein is going to give you boom, a good load of stomach acid, but you want to maintain that stomach flow of acidity to ensure that all the proteins are getting wet and well soaked and becoming uncoiled or denatured, and the pepsinogen, the activation of intrinsic factor is taking place. And so the presence of fats seems to be a very critical part in getting the long-term hold, the long-term flow of the acidity from the gastric walls. That is only happening to me. So again, these are not anything that you should run with. These are common sense things that are happening for me, so I am just sharing it to myself. Managing acidity can help with the digestive issues like acid reflux. We learned that a long time ago. The mechanism, I would just go back up here into the photo here and show you that there is a closing valve here and there is a closing valve. They have name for them, I think LES and pyloric splinter. This acidity here, when it is very acidic, the entire construct of the human brain says there is a very tight closed valve, and a tight closed valve that would not allow the acid to leave this big bolus called the bottle, the stomach, this part here. And if this stomach is not so acidic, not heavily acidic like pH 1 or 2, then what happens, the two opening allows the closures, the valves, to be a little bit more loose and things could flow back up. That's where you get reflux, and things would also flow down. That is where the bolus of food would trickle down into the duodenum and then into the small intestine. So the whole common sense for me is that having a very acidic stomach means closing the valve here naturally. Okay, you may find some evidence on the internet on a lot of people showing you the similar thing happening to based on research observation. Now what is happening here again, we see that the importance of a stomach acidity is to kill pathogens coming in with the food. We are always bringing pathogens with our food, what we ingest in our mouth, sometimes what we breathe and comes through that whole thing. We are bringing in all those bacteria and things, they come in, but some of them has to be killed by the great acid pH level 1 and 2 of the stomach. We also note that the acidity in the stomach activates the intrinsic factor to convert or to make B12 active or make B12 bioavailable, whatever the word is. That is what is happening here, and that is why some persons may say they are having problem with B12. Well, vegetarians are always having problems with B12. That is my old guy, that guy who I knew before. He had a lot of B12 issues, and you know B12 is so critical to create red blood cells that if you don't want to wake up and smell the cappuccino in your coffee cup about B12 and the importance of B12, then you could continue living your life until you reach the state where I was before, and then you would be able to appreciate this information. I'm speaking to myself anyhow. Now, the activation of the intrinsic factor to convert B12 to bioavailable B12 or whatever it is doing, I don't know too much about that, but that is happening. We know the activation of pepsinogen to make pepsin, which is the scissors that would cut, or the instrument that would cut up the polypeptides into small particles, and then the smaller particles get really subdivided into the atomic states later on. Is very important for protein digestion. And what I'm including here is the activation. I'm using these terms here loosely: the GLP-1, which is activation of the glucagon-like peptide, and the GIP, with also CCK. These three hormones, I bulk them here because they are critical for digestion, and apparently the presence of fat and the presence of protein would activate them better than the regular type of carbohydrates. So it's important to note that fat would trigger GLP-1 and protein will trigger GLP-1, GIP, and CCK. Specifically, fat would trigger a good release of a hormone called CCK, cholecysteine kinase, which would go up the road very quickly and indicate to the gallbladder you need to squeeze when the bolus of foods that are leaving the lower pyloric splinter. So when time something comes here, CCK would already be prepared to run up the road, go to the gallbladder somewhere up here, squeeze the gallbladder to bring down a lot of bile, because the sensory system in your gastric walls would have sent the message up to the brain and say, when this thing bolus of food chime hits the duodenum, we need CCK because there is a lot of fats in that food. Now let me show you what's happening here. In my body, if I have what I consider to be a constant flow, what is called gastric emptying for people who believe in gastric emptying, which is a real thing. If you have a constant flow of your gastric thing, like every, you know, it doesn't flow like a pipe, right? But let's say your chime, your mix of food comes and start flowing every 2 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, just a release of chime, release of chime, release of chime. What do you think is happening with the flow of your bile? Let's assume you have fat and bile is flowing. Then you would be pushing out bile, pushing out bile, pushing out bile, and then your bile from your gallbladder, which is the concentrated bile, gets used up, and then the liver is just sending out some bile, which is not so concentrated. So your digestion of fat becomes quite compromised. You'll start seeing floaty stools in the poop chute, down in the toilet. Now, you have to be, as me, I have to be conscious of these little factors, because it means the fats are not just creating the GLP-1 and GIP, I guess, activation or whatever it is. They are also causing, together with the protein, they are causing a factor to happen here in terms of delayed emptying of our stomach, meaning that where a non-type protein and fat diet would cause you to move things out quickly, and that's what you see with carbohydrate, no matter what carbohydrate we're speaking about, except maybe a lot of, I'll explain it in a few minutes, fat, the insoluble fiber. But general carbohydrate would move out of the stomach so quickly that you are actually pulling out everything without a proper digestion taking place of the protein and the fat. With the protein and the fat, what you have happening here is the fat is delaying the release or the dumping or the movement of things out here. So you would have a scenario, that's in my case a scenario where, let's say, every 10 minutes you have the first bolus of food leaving the lower pyloric splinter coming to the duodenum down here. 10 minutes you have some CCK go up to the gallbladder, squeeze the gallbladder, tell the gallbladder squeeze, some comes down. Okay, the liver sends down some more bile and it goes into the thing. It spends that 20 minutes. So in another 20 minutes, you get another little squeeze and you have a better amount of distribution of your bile, of course, of pancreatic juice to come in there. I'm just using the timing to give an example. For example, a protein based substance, you just have a whole kind of more like a runny liquid running out of the stomach, and because it doesn't have fat, you don't have much squeezing of the gallbladder. You have all these things happening, well, leaving your gallbladder towards just storing and storing, and later on you put yourself into gallbladder related issues. Anyhow, let's move on. So we have these things here, these hormones, and they get activated or agitated or whatever the word is, activated, and they help out with the whole flow of things, the flow of things that are supposed to happen in a very timely but also sensible manner, which is what has not been happening to people on the plant-based vegetarian so-called breaditarian diet for the last 33 years of their life. Now again, we said that these good acid, the acidity in the stomach locks up the upper and lower, well, the splinter valves, locks the pipes here, so that acid would not run out. So the reason why we have reflux largely, most likely, is when the acidity levels get weak. So you would get reflux or upset stomach or whatever you want to call it very easy when you overeat. And go and check on what you're overeating. You are overeating, you go to a party and you have so much carbs, so much this and that and this and that, you load up on all these carbs, and so your stomach acidity is no more gonna be acid for two reasons. It wouldn't release so much of acid because it's a lot of carbohydrates. It wants the carbohydrates to pass through quickly because it's not supposed to be holding carbohydrates here, and you understand why, because if you hold a lot of carbohydrates here, we're talking about fermentation. Secondly, you want to see, you're bringing all this food here, it's also diluting the little bit of acid, so then your whole stomach acidity is dropping and dropping and dropping to, well, when I say dropping, it's becoming weaker acid, weaker acid, weaker acid. And the weaker the acid is, the more you dump. Weaker the acid, more you dump. So you have carbohydrates just passing through, and the splinters would be open. Now both splinters would be open when the acid becomes weak. So you would be dumping things down, but also you might have a little bob because you remember you're fermenting here, and you bring up something and you say, oh, nasty tasting. The acid comes up and you're saying you have acid reflux. That is not really bad acid, that is just a little acid. If you really had an acid reflux from the true acidity of your stomach, it would burn these parts here so much that you would feel the burn of pH 1 and 2. Nevertheless, it's pH 3 or 4 that you're tasting when you get a burp like that with stomach acidity. So if you want to fix that, cut the carbs. Let's go on to the next point, which is the extraction of the minerals. So minerals are extracted because of the presence of acid. Again, this is just me, not happening to anybody else, so do not comment and say this is not true or whatever. Find your research and show me. That would be the best way to show me that this is not happening. But we are wasting a lot of supplements when we take them and we do not have a very good acidic stomach. The extraction of the minerals, the bioavailability of the minerals still comes down to the acidic stomach. That is why you see a lot of producers are making a lot of these things and saying they are bioavailable. We need to understand the importance of the acidity of the stomach to extract the nutrients from these minerals. So how do you get the best out of your minerals? Well, protein and fat, sources of amino acids, sources of fatty acids and minerals, tie them together, you would have a better activation of the minerals or extraction of the minerals from the substrate. High intensity acid release from protein foods. So when you have protein foods, and I'm speaking about low carbs with protein, so we're speaking about meats here. Maybe I should put a picture of meats here. Meats would be protein based foods, and that would cause it would trigger a quick and strong increase in stomach acid. And of course, that is to help digest the protein, as we discussed earlier. So meats, eggs, fish, well, be careful with dairy. I would underline that here because you would sooner or later see why. So what's about our rich protein plant base? The reason why plant protein is not doing well, it is not because it is not a good source of protein. So let's say we understand the science that lentil has 7 amino acids of the essential 8 or the essential 9, and we are consuming lentil and we tie it with peas. What is happening here? Rice and lentil will be a complete source of the 8 or 9 essential amino acid, but you still might hear the argument that we do not get the amino acids becoming well utilized by the DS scores, so forth and so on. The reason might be simply because these both here are tied in with a lot of carbs. The time it takes for the uncoiling of the amino acid of the protein structures to create that chain that the pepsin would have to cut up may not be enough because of the pool of the carbohydrates that is in the lentils and the rice as constructed in what we call carbs. Rice and lentils, they have so much carbs, so they are pulling to get out, whereas they should be staying in to be well soaked in amino acids, because they are, no matter how you turn, these two substrates together are heavily carbohydrates, so they would not want to stay in the stomach and they would not be triggering the release of amino acids, even though we say they contain dietary protein, even though we know that they contain plant-based amino acids. So what do you have to do here? You would have to, of course, focus on the human diet, which is ruminant animals. Think about ruminant animals. Ruminant animals, we would first ferment their foods for about 36 to 48 hours in that fermentation chamber, the first stomach, and then that fermentation process brings out or decreases the glucose level because the sugars are converted into acids, and the acids are also, and there are other substrates like I guess butyrate and other substrates that is necessary, but you have a decrease in the glucose level because of the fermentation process, and then they send it to another stomach, and then they send it into the true acidic stomach where they have a better what I call absorption of amino acids from what we call plants, but by that time it is no longer plants, it's on a fermented, well processed by the first stomach of the ruminant animal. That is why the meats of the ruminant animal is prized possession in the thought of myself. Now you have those plant-based proteins, so therefore I would still go, even though tofu and so is questioned because of the issues, I would still say tofu, which is a fermented form of the soy, may be a more better substance or substrate. But I would say to my plant eating self, if I am going to eat plants, I would not. If I'm going to eat plants and I have to reach in the states where quinoa, rice, lentil, tofu, soy, those things, I would not advocate. But I would say if I have to eat them and that is all that I have to eat, my first elemental thinking now would be I need to force acidify my stomach to keep these things there for a longer period so that the amino acids or the polypeptides from these carbohydrates would get enough time in the stomach to become very well acidified, and the pepsinogen could do the job before releasing it into the duodenum and then down finally into the thing. Secondly, what I would do is ensure I get a lot of fatty acids with these things. So the coconut oils, the avocado, the other things that has fatty acids, maybe walnut, and what else? The olive oils. Those fatty acids would be a substrate that I will put in. In fact, when I look back into my years before I was born, my parents and those never cooked the lentil soups without a coconut milk. That is how it was done, and that is instructive for me if I would go into those situations. Again, I would say must have coconut milk, which would help with creating the fatty acids, because the coconut milk creates the coconut oil, which is fatty acids, and that helps in the creation. So I put this here because there are some people who would not believe yet, and in the rationalization of not believing, you still have to find the best of the worst, and the best of the worst is to at least understand it is important to throw a lot of fatty acids with these carbohydrate source, because the carbohydrates are just pulling to get down into the small intestine, and the lack of acidity is going to cause you to become challenged. So this is just the first part. It's already 25 minutes into the video. Thank you for viewing. I would be here tomorrow to look at fats now. How fats? No. Let us go on. Fats. So fat is a very important one to trigger, of course, the GLP, GIP, and CCK. Very important. We just spoke a little bit about having those even with plant-based diet eaters. You need to very much, of course, understand that so that you don't go into these challenges. So having a lot of these kind of fats, butter would be ideally better, and stuff like that. But you would avoid it, of course, because somebody tell you differently. But what we need to understand here about fats also is this point, that it would cause a slow but longer lasting acidic release, which is critical to hold and ensure that you have acid. So imagine you eat a big bowl of carbohydrate based plant things. You don't want to just say, well, you think you have enough acid there. You want to make sure that there is enough acid there. So putting in the fats helps triggers more of the release of the gastrin and the gastric acidity to keep the substance in the stomach for a longer time, because remember, all plants are going to be trying to pull to get out of the stomach quickly because of the carbohydrate load. The second thing is you need to make sure you wet your food and have activation of pepsin or gentopepsin to cut up all these things so that you could get better amino acids coming from that. The thing that a lot of persons would have realized for plant-based eaters that you could do to really help you is to supplement with acid building foods, which is things like the let me see, things like the limes. I don't know if I have a slide on it. I should have a slide on it. The limes, the apple cider vinegar, those things are supplemental acidity, which is very important for plant-based eaters to help increase acidity. So regardless of what side you are on in terms of your eating, if you are a heavy plant-based eater, having the preposition or the ideas of I am doing the apple cider vinegar with my meal to help with the acidity, or the lime with my meal, the lemon juice with my meal, I am doing the biting HCI with my meal to help increase the acidity. Once the acidity is increased, it helps do the digestion and the mineral extractions very okay. But also I need to keep the food in the stomach for as long as possible so that I don't continue to eat 101 times for the day as a again, your fats, focus on your fats. Now, mild acid release carbohydrates, and it's mild, it's short-lived, because the rule of carbohydrates according to my body is to jump out of the stomach as soon as I could, and that's what carbohydrates would do. I have some notes on that here. I do note that the fiber, which is the one that cannot be digested, the insoluble fiber, would irritate the lining of the stomach, and anything that irritates the lining of the stomach causes a release of stomach acidity. So when you look at undigested insoluble type fiber, it does, and I would not get the paper to show you. You have to go to the website and see if I would have included that there. But the soluble fiber, I don't know anything about that yet. Direct acidic foods, which is things like the lime, the biotin, these are supplements that you would use to help in the digestive process. Again, the principle is that you need the acid to digest these foods who wants to leave the stomach, the high carb food. If you are on a meat-based diet, heavy meat-based diet, you're more than likely doing the right stuff. You eat your meat first, you'll have the gastric walls creating the gastric acid juices, and that will be wonderful for all intents and purposes of your health. But remember, you need to repair damages caused by the stomach when you're on a plant-based diet, because more than likely you are eating the insoluble fiber, which is irritating the lining of the stomach walls, literally damaging the stomach wall lining, and that would have to be repaired. What repairs it? Again, it's back to the amino acids and the fatty acids that has to come back and do the repair job. If you continue eating like that, over time you start realizing that you have irritated gut, and then you have other issues, things like the bacteria that comes in because your stomach acidity is so low that they make set up shop, they get the glucose in the stomach there, and they create things like LPS, lipopolysaccharide layers. And so you need to be very careful about the plant-based eating. Try to get these things thought about carefully. If you are trying to buffer stomach acidity, milk and dairy products quite well. So you need to understand that you don't want to use dairy products when you are having your meat-based, fat-based diet, because you shall be putting yourself in a position where the stomach is supposed to be making acids to really digest the meats and the fats, or to do whatever it does with the fat, but digest or open up the uncoil the protein of the meat, and you are putting something that will buffer the acidity levels there. Be careful with this. Make sure that when you are eating, you are keeping away from that dairy as long as possible, and then you get to dairy as maybe the snack, middle between 2-3 hours after. Then the takeaway for me is that protein fats activates CCK greater than carbohydrates, and specifically the carbohydrate that would activate CCK is that irritating gut lining fiber, the insoluble fiber. So we need to focus on those kind of things when we are thinking about our ingestion, that you are ingesting a carbohydrate and you are not ingesting enough fats, or you might be just ingesting something that has sources of amino acids, which we call protein, sources of fatty acids, and sources of glucose. You might be eating like a rice with lentil and quinoa and falafel or whatever you eat for your thing, or soy. You gotta concentrate on the fats to ensure you get the best of the acidity in play. Now the application, you could run through it from downloading the slide which is on the site. Again, protein and fats from your main meal. Avoid carbohydrates around those time, because carbohydrates has the effect or the tendency to pull things out of the stomach, and you don't want to pull your protein and your fats out of your stomach. You want them to stay in your stomach based upon the natural clause, so that the stomach would digest them to its granular forms, so that they would be further digested into the elemental amino acids later on down the road. You do not want to have your fats and your protein just rushing out of the stomach and getting down there and you have undigested protein, because undigested protein later down in the colon would have to be fermented by some bacteria also. Therefore, these things happen when you transition your diet, of course, to a good fat and protein diet from a vegetarian. These things would happen at first because you do not have the stomach acidity, and hence you might want to be very conscious about starting to use some biotin HCI as supplements to get the stomach acidity going, also repairing your gut. And that is why I say repair the gut. Think about things like B 157 BC body protected compound. I think this is useful because I've used it to help repair the lining of the gut. I will use amino acids capsules to supplement in the short, 5 to 6 months. You use those things to get the lining repair. You may even have to throw in some supplements like the precursor to glutathione NAC to help clean up the levels. But you want to be on a protein and fat diet to really keep that flow of acidity, to clean out the gut, to sterilize the gut, and all those things like H. pylori, to get rid of them. The carbs, whether it's fruits carbs or whatever, it's really and truly the extra source of glucose, because remember, the liver is gonna make glucose based upon the demands of all organs that demands it, and they cannot make for themselves. The liver could make it from fatty acids, from fats, proteins, amino acids inside available. So you need to make sure you have enough amino acids, enough fatty acids in the blood system available by the liver, and let the liver deal with all the glucose production if it needs to, when it needs to provide the brain and other organs. At the same time, if you are supplying glucose, which is the sources of glucose which comes from carbohydrates and all the plant-based things, you have to know how and when, if you are in that state. But for me, I would not go down that road in a hurry. I would stick to fats and proteins coming from the meats of meats. So thank you very much for being with me here today. This was my video, my sharing for myself. If you find anything useful here and you want to ask questions, please feel free to ask them in the comments. I would read the comments and I would not respond to you, but I would respond to myself.